This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
And so to see them, as excited about what's happening as I am, makes me really happy. And to see them, put a cheese platter together and see their hard work, come to fruition, that to me is like, oh yeah, that's, I feel like I'm doing my job. That's my role.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Tasmania is known for some extraordinary produce, both from land and sea. But it wasn't until recently that we've witnessed an extraordinary evolution of its hospitality offering. What's it like to be part of the young, vibrant and colourful culinary landscape being created in Tasmania? Rodney Dunn is the owner of the Agrarian Kitchen in Tasmania. Rodney, how are you?
Oh, good, Anthony. How are you?
Good. You've been a leader in Tasmania and sort of a big voice in this sort of amazing evolution that's happened in regards to food and hospitality there. Well, what's it been like for you over the last sort of a decade and a half?
It's been surreal, to tell you the truth. It's funny to hear myself described in that way, because here I was, 13 years ago, moving to this, basically the end of the world to some people, and with this crazy idea that Tasmania could be this thing that we're seeing happen now, and that's really interesting to me, and I think justification that it really was a special place, and I didn't get my wires crossed, and there was such potential here, and I think that's the thing that makes me happiest is not only seeing what we've achieved in our business, but looking at what else has happened here and how far it's come. Like, it's really, really exciting.
Has this evolution, which as you say, it is quite extraordinary, but has it opened up sort of opportunities for you that you didn't sort of know would happen or didn't see?
Oh, yeah, look, I think, in our business, we've certainly gone a lot further than what I ever imagined we would. When we first were moving down, it was like, here, we want to move it, it was kind of like almost a stepping back and, to a quieter life a little bit, and going, oh, let's open this, little cooking school down here, and people come down. And, here we are, like 12 years later, and with a restaurant and the cooking school in the garden and, kiosk and, all these things that have happened, 25 staff, it's crazy. Yeah.
Well, take us back to that time. Like, what was it like creating that sort of vision that you had at the time? I mean, paint a picture of Tasmania and also the challenges you faced.
Yeah, well, the thing about Tasmania was that you could see that the foundations were here. So I remember coming down on a trip that Tourism Tasmania brought me down, and I was working for Gourmet Traveller at the time, and I'd watched way too much River Cottage, and just in my mind I thought, where in Australia could this sort of culture exist? And I remember thinking, maybe Tasmania, and it wasn't long after that I jumped at a chance to come down, and going around and talking to some of the chefs that were here and seeing the producers, and just this culture of try anything, what could we do in Tasmania? Because I think the problem here for farmers was that, you're a long way away. It's something like the second most expensive stretch of water in the world, that Bass Strait. So to compete with, mainland farmers on grain and on meat and things like that, it was very hard to do. So you saw these farmers that were going, hey, what's this wasabi thing? Oh, hey, maybe we can grow truffles, and, just looking for alternatives. And, that was what excited me. And moving down here, we kind of, there just wasn't that culture yet with like that producer restaurant connection. And so that idea that we do something where we tried to do as much as our own stuff and then tried to supplement that a little bit was kind of what enabled us to start in the first place. and that was the thing I think for us was starting that and just seeing the things sort of develop around it. And as I would find, say, a great producer of X, Y, or Z, I'd sort of add them, I guess, to the fold. So yeah, it's been. And in terms of restaurants, there just wasn't much here at all. Luke Burgess opened Garagist, first Pecora and Garagist, and, he's a very, very good friend of mine. And he was sort of a cohort on this first little journey down here. And, we did some trips around looking at land and thinking about ideas and things that we could do. So, yeah, we settled on the cooking school, and Séverine, my wife, said, I think we mentioned restaurants. She said, no, don't do a restaurant. That'd be crazy. You'll be tied to it. That's mad. And so I remember in my first book saying, we'll never open a restaurant. And, life makes a liar out of you, doesn't it?
Well, you opened a pretty damn good restaurant, but what did you start growing first? And, you had a mix of animals and vegetables and things as well. Like, how did you get started?
So the property where the Agrarian Kitchen started was an old schoolhouse. And we had 5 acres of land around us. So we started the garden. I had a guy help me set up the garden, and we had pigs, because that was, something I was passionate about, having some pigs and making some charcuterie. And we had some milking goats. So I think I've had everything over the years, and had geese, and we had chickens, and, bits and pieces of everything. And it was really about that immersive experience where, people could really come and really get to the crux of food and see it at its source, and look at what the difference is if we, say, pull that carrot out of ground, as to, having something that's, you're not sure how long it's been out of the soil, and you're not sure what the variety is. So it was really kind of drilling back into that bare, grassroots, pardon the pun, of food.
Well, what surprised you early on when the cooking school was up and running?
I think I was probably most surprised. Well, firstly, about the reaction. I think there's a lot of people out there who were of the same mindset and thought, that was something that was exciting to kind of experience. But also for me, it's been a constant journey of learning flavour. And so when you think you know something, and then like taking it to the next step, we go, oh, wow, that's even more flavour, or that's even better than I thought. It still happens to this day. So, that's something I'll never get sick of. And I usually say to people, it's been a very selfish journey, because I'm doing it for myself first and foremost, and then the rest, the rest of the people. It's nice to share with people. We all know what it's like to eat in restaurants by ourselves, or to have food experience by ourselves. There's so much better when they're shared with other people.
I want to explore sort of what you're doing there, and the creation of the restaurant, and what's in the plans for later this year as well. But take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play in your family?
I mean, I always liked eating, but I think the thing was, it was never a chore for me. It was, some kids, they're like, oh, I have to eat, I have to eat to fuel my body. But I grew up with in a very Anglo-Saxon background, very white bread. It was nothing exciting. Like, I don't have those stories of potting peas at the knees of my grandmother or anything remotely like that. I do remember like aunties and being good bakers. And so I think that's probably carried through to this day. Like, I love baked goods. I love sugar. I love, cake, and I love pastries and stuff like that. So that's probably the one standout. Everything else was, roasts and lamb chops and overcooked vegetables. And, my mum was never an amazing cook. She's not someone that, tried to replicate. I grew up in the era of, kind of like continental packets of soup with the apricot chicken recipe on the back and on the French onion soup. And that was something special. Oh, we're having apricot chicken tonight. So yeah, I mean, I'm one of 4 boys, and so you can imagine it was just, putting food on the table, feeding these growing kids. So Yeah.
Your career in food is quite fascinating. You actually sort of started in restaurants. Tell us about those sort of early days and what the kitchens were like for you.
Yeah, look, I remember, right back at those tender young years where you need to decide what you're going to do in life. And I enjoyed cooking, and cooking was something that living out on a property kind of out of the town, it was kind of something that was something to do. And so, you'd be hungry and Mum would go, oh, well, make something then. And Mum had this collection of Woman's Weekly cookbooks, as many mums of that time. And, I remember pouring through those and looking at the beautiful biscuits and stuff. And that's how I kind of got interested in cooking. And then from then I got an apprenticeship. My dad hooked me up with an apprenticeship at a local restaurant, which was, it was fine, but it wasn't, I used to buy the Gourmet Travellers and the Vogue Entertaining, and it wasn't that. And so I remember when I first started there, like most of the desserts were bought in, and then I started like making a few things, and I wanted to make stuff from scratch, and just, I just wanted more. So it wasn't long before I moved on to a restaurant there, which was quite remarkable it was Griffith in southwest New South Wales, so 6 or 7 hours away from Sydney and about 5 from Melbourne. And there was an Italian chef there who opened a place called Cafe Bassano, which was one had at the time, and that was like a whole new world for me. And they made everything from scratch, and that was super exciting, and kind of what I feel as really gave me the fundamentals of good food. And beyond that, I always wanted to take the next step and move to the big smoke. And there was a job going at Tetsuya's at the time for a third-year apprentice. So I said, okay, that's 3 hats. Yep, great, let's go. So I remember my father drove me down. We drove down, so 6-7 hours down and 6-7 hours back in the same day, and spent about probably 15-20 minutes with Tets, and sat down and had a little chat. And he's like, this was on a Thursday, he's like, right, can you start Monday? Oh, Tuesday. No, he didn't open Monday, Tuesday. And I was like, yeah. So went home, packed everything up, and just, moved down, stayed with family friends, and was kind of just in that little Roselle kitchen, working my butt off. And it was a real eye-opener for me, going from, doing 40-ish hours to, 80, so 70 or 80. So that was kind of the baptism of fire, where, everything was about perfection. Everything had to be perfect, and you did the same thing day in, day out. It was the same process. Menu rarely changed. So...
Do you have any stories of what it was like to work with Tetsuya then?
Look, he was tough but fair, I must say. Like, anything you did wrong and got in trouble for, it was certainly warranted. And I must say, I probably appreciate it more as a boss, as an employer, than I did then. So, look, he was good. And I certainly, one thing that I took away from that place is just self-discipline, having that level of discipline for yourself where you want to do the best you can possibly do, and not kind of slack off and, cut those chives a little bit longer, or, just working to an ideal.
You moved to what some might say is the dark side, to media, from the industry. Tell us about what triggered that transition and what it was like for you. Well,
I remember feeling kind of very worn down at Tetsuya's, and kind of not in a frame of mind that, I could see myself with my own restaurant, which was the inevitable step, really. And when I was at Tetsuya's, I met a food photographer and followed her around for a couple of weeks when Tets was actually over at the James Beard Foundation cooking with Charlie Trotter. So I saw this whole other side to things where you could still work with great food, but work a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5-ish, and be involved in probably a more creative side, if anything, certainly judging by, most restaurants of that time where the menus stayed relatively the same and didn't really change too much seasonally, so to speak. And so I had an opportunity probably about a year after that where, I found myself either having to go back into restaurants, like to go to get another restaurant job, or an opportunity to start working in the food media. So I started just assisting food stylists, and one of the things is I could cook, so I could help them get the ingredients together for a photo shoot and go and cook it and present it for the shoot. So that's how I sort of started, just doing that, and I did some agency chefing work in the meantime, which I can't recommend to anyone. It was very soul destroying. So I just worked my way in like that and worked freelance for most of my career, and full-time at Gourmet Traveller just in the last 3 years.
Did that experience in the media, did it change your perception of food in the food industry?
Inevitably, yes, it always does. And I think, working out of season with produce, and I think, it changed my perception certainly of how to present things and to plate things. So there's positives and negatives to everything. And one of the big things I think was in terms of how to actually write a recipe, because that's a skill as chefs. They're scribbles in a scrappy old notebook. They're not thought out sets of instructions for somebody who has never met you, can kind of reproduce your recipe. So I think in that respect, it was an incredibly valuable experience to learn to write a recipe for someone else to cook is, a very good skill.
What were some of the challenges, when you did move to Tasmania and change your life so dramatically? What were the challenges sort of in the first sort of 5 years for you guys?
Well, when we first moved down, our son, he was 2 months old. And so trying to set up initially with him, and I remember Séverine and just starting a business from scratch that, nobody has ever heard of before, and certainly trying to do something where you don't, you've kind of spent all your life savings. So, which we were trying to do it as like Séverine used to wash up in class, and so she'd put our son down and she'd come out and wash up, and then she knew that she'd pay for it later because he'd be awake half the night. And it's little things like that, being out at 8 o'clock at night mowing the lawn for the class the next day, and it's all those things that I think people don't realise. You're kind of like a duck, paddling like mad underwater but smooth sailing on top. So that was difficult. And I think I've always been the type of person who always kind of wants to, you look at yourself critically and you want to improve what you do. So that constant evolution has been something that I think has driven us from the start.
It's an interesting thing to bring up because you received many accolades for the cooking school, including sort of greatest gourmet food experience. And what were the pressures like once there was that sort of limelight on what you were doing?
Look, I think we didn't really think too much about it. I think what it enabled us to do was to just get a really solid following, and most classes would be full, and it enabled us to do what we do and continue to improve. And I think what helped me was being on the other side of it, where you having worked in the media that gives those accolades, and I guess taking them seriously, but not taking them too seriously. Like, it doesn't define who you are and it doesn't define what you do. It's nice to be recognised, but not let it bring you down at the same time, not feel the pressure, just to continue on. You got them for doing what you're doing, just keep doing what you're doing. And equally, if you don't get them, it doesn't mean what you're doing is not valid or good. It's just, it's the way it is.
You mentioned that Séverine said no way to a restaurant ever, but in 2017 you opened the Agrarian Kitchen Eatery. How did that come about? And what was it like?
Well, the building in the old asylum had some renovations done to it. Basically, just to give you a bit of background of New Norfolk, it was home to the Southern Hemisphere's largest mental asylum that had grown over many years, and stunning architecture, and it closed in 2000. And from that time, it kind of started to fall apart, as old buildings do, and the local youth come and use it as a playground, and it was there'd many ideas had kind of been put forth about what to do with it, but it was kind of pre-Tasmania being a place to visit, more than, say, the caravanning set and the camping set. So the local council had been given the buildings by the state government, and they got a grant from the federal and state government combined to start to do some things. And so the building that we're in, they started to renovate. And the local mayor at the time said to me, "Oh, you want to come along and have a look at this building? Maybe you know someone, they'd be interested." And so Séverine and I came along and walked inside and went, "Oh my God, this is amazing, and it's too good to sit here doing nothing." And we kind of just looked at each other, and we both knew what we were thinking, like we're in big trouble. And like if us being the crazy risk takers, if we didn't do it, who was going to do it? And the town badly needed somewhere, that was a draw card to eat. Because, you'd go down south to Cygnet and there was Red Velvet Lounge and it was sort of something you go, "Oh, let's get in the car and drive out down on the weekend and have something to eat." So it sort of just evolved from there. And, I remember initially it was going to be like, this sort of really casual eatery. People can pop in and have a plate of pasta, and people, it's we won't make our bread. We'll buy some great pigeonhole bread and we'll do this and do that. And then we open, and before we know it, we're making everything, cheese included, all the charcuterie, and going, well, this is not kind of like, it's great, we're busy, but it's for the energy and effort we're putting in. I think two things. I think the customers some of the customers expected probably something a bit more serious, not so light and casual. And then the flip side of that, you get the people who are used to the local cafe where they can get a bowl of chips and, this and that, and it wasn't for them either. So, trying to cook from this garden, fulfill this a la carte menu was really quite a challenge each week. And, Ali, our first chef, did an amazing job to, kind of keep all this craziness under control. I remember, you'd be running from the time we opened the doors to the time we closed them. And it was hard on everyone. It was hard on staff. It was hard on equipment, just to be that kind of busy, bustling place. So, I remember with my current head chef, Stephen, when he took over, having that discussion about moving to something that's more reminiscent of the cooking school, where it's a menu taken from the garden, the best of what's there, and us being able to control it a little bit more and give people that experience. Because already at that time, most people, probably 50%, maybe more, were choosing the Feed Me menu and wanting that experience anyway. But the question was, how do you end one thing that people know you as and open another? Along comes a pandemic, and suddenly, the opportunity's there. So when we reopened, it was set menu, as most people did, and we also opened our kiosk, which was the casual side of it. So,
Well, what's been the success of this sort of change in the model that you've created?
I think it allows us to deliver a really special, tailored experience. And from the beginning, we've kind of had to be educators. So, I guess to lead people down that path that vegetables are really special, and down that path that, that you can kind of really put seasonality on a plate, and not just seasonality in terms of a state or a country, seasonality in terms of this place right here in this garden. So that's been really great. If we want to, if the carrots are absolutely amazing, we can serve a carrot on the plate. It might be grilled and brushed with some shoyu that we've made, but that's all part of the story. And to have this kind of progression of courses that just really do, like so many people talk about seasonality, but they really do highlight exactly what's right at this time on this day. So that's been lovely.
We're sort of pushing into spring right now. What should people expect on the menu? What sort of things are coming from the garden?
Well, we've got the most amazing peas. There's a variety that we serve called Lacy Lady, which I got from a neighbour who got it from another guy out where we live out at Lachlan, and we've grown them. We've grown most varieties of peas that I could get my hands on, and these ones stand out. So kind of we continue to grow them, and to have them like so sweet that they're you'd think they've been glazed in icing sugar. Is something that I've known for the last 10, 12 years, but to give them to a customer who has never had peas like that, that's what it's about.
The Agrarian Kitchen is going to combine operations under one roof in October. Tell us a bit about that decision and what's happening.
Well, for many years when we opened the restaurant, I would have thought there would have been more sort of cross-pollination, I guess, between the two. But what we found is we'd have guests that would come out to the cooking school, and another guest would say something about the restaurant, and they'd be like, "Oh, do you have a restaurant?" And then equally in the restaurant, there'd be guests, and they'd say, "Oh, this has come from the cooking school," and they'd be like, "Oh, do you have a cooking school?" So just that kind of, it needed to be, together. And, equally I'd be out at the cooking school and go, "Oh, that pasta roller, it's in at the restaurant." Or they'd be like, "Oh, where's that such and such?" "Oh, it's out at the cooking school." So the opportunity to put them all in one building was something that would have been ideal. But the kicker with all of that was that there was this big empty room at the other end of the restaurant building that wasn't being used. And then the final piece of the puzzle was the garden, because that's central to everything. And literally 20 metres from the back door of the restaurant is a big walled exercise yard that was part of the asylum for those that were sort of imprisoned in that ward. It was a sort of a prison ward, were let out to roam around. So it's 1 acre in size with these big walls, thick concrete walls. And I remember Pelissa Anderson was down, and I showed her the space. She goes, "Look, why don't you move the garden into here?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, sort of just." And then she was talking to my wife when she went out to where the garden was. And then we had time over the next few hours to think about it. And then when I got home, we was like, "You know what? That's a really good idea." So we kind of worked on it and spoke to council about leasing the space, and probably 3 years later, here we are, it's coming to fruition. And so we've been able to build a big brand new kitchen in what we called the possum room. It had no ceiling in it and possums running through the rafters, and develop this amazing garden from scratch out in the exercise yard. So our first class is I think the 30th of October, and we're on from then.
This big move that you made to Tasmania, all those years ago, and what you've created, has it changed you?
I don't feel like it has. I'm still a dreamer. Like, I'm a typical Piscean, if you believe in star signs, and if you can dream it up, I'll have a crack at trying to do it. And I think the fact that risks I've taken have paid off, and I think right back to when I moved from chefing into working in magazines, I've continued to take risks that have paid off. Educated risks, I like to think, but I think that's what's helped drive this, and us go, well, why can't we do this? What would the ideal scenario be? What would the ideal restaurant, if I had to have a restaurant, what would it look like? And this is it. So, it's just, I've just been fortunate to be in the situations, but also brave enough to take the risks.
Well, the restaurant scene has been evolving incredibly down there, but what's important in running a restaurant sort of in Tasmania? Is it a bit different to the sort of big cities like Sydney and Melbourne?
Look, I think when people come to Tasmania, they expect you to at least have local produce. And so they come away on this destinational dining experience to wherever it might be in the state and expect to be eating produce of the state. So I think there's that onus on all of the, and expectation on any restaurateur and chef. And I think also it extends to the wine. People want to be drinking Tasmanian wines as much as possible. I certainly wouldn't want to be in Italy drinking Australian wines. And just, I think what's happening in the world is just that that change in terms of destinational dining and that seasonality, and the customers are much more savvy. So, yeah, I think that there is that expectation. Whereas I don't feel that when I go to Melbourne or Sydney and dine out. I'm not like, oh, where's this from? And, why are you serving this at this time of year?
Well, you continue to do amazing things down there in Tasmania. What do you love about what you do?
Oh, look, I think at this stage of our journey, I really love, seeing our staff get excited. And we've got I laugh about the quote, they've drunk the Kool-Aid, and we have a little saying is they've drunk the kefir milk, because we use kefir to culture our butter and our cheeses and stuff like that. And so to see them, as excited about what's happening as I am, makes me really happy. And to see the cheeses, because we make all our cheese that we serve, and to see them, put a cheese platter together where we've got 5 different cheeses that, each one of the kitchen staff have made, to be able to put those on a plate and see their hard work, come to fruition. That to me is like, oh yeah, that's. I feel like I'm doing my job. That's my role. Because Stephen, my head chef, does an amazing job of putting the menu together for the dining room. But it's I'm there to support, if you know what I mean.
Well, Rodney, it's absolutely extraordinary what you've built down there and continue to build. Looking forward to seeing everything once it opens again later in October. Thanks for joining us on Deep in the Weeds. Keep in touch. We'll catch up again soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Anthony.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.